Sarah Martinez had always been careful about her tattoo. The small black ink design sat quietly on her left shoulder blade, hidden beneath her military uniform every single day. She had gotten it 3 years ago, right before joining the army. Back then, it seemed like just another piece of body art. Something personal that meant the world to her but looked ordinary to everyone else. The tattoo showed what appeared to be simple, geometric lines forming an abstract pattern. Most people who caught a glimpse of it during shower time or medical checkups assumed it was just decorative art. Some thought it looked like a tribal design. Others saw it as modern minimalist artwork. Sarah never corrected them. She never explained what those lines actually represented. The truth was far more personal and painful than anyone could imagine. Her fellow soldiers at Fort Braxton had no idea that Sarah carried this secret on her skin. To them, she was just another dedicated private who followed orders, kept her head down, and performed her duties without complaint. She had been stationed at the base for 8 months now, and life had fallen into a predictable routine. Morning drills, afternoon training, evening duties, and lights out. Day after day, the same schedule kept her mind busy and her past locked away. Sarah's bunkmate, Jessica, had noticed the tattoo during their first week together, but never asked about it. Military life taught people to respect privacy, especially when it came to personal matters. Everyone had their reasons for joining the army, and everyone had stories they preferred not to share. The unspoken rule was simple: don't ask unless someone wants to tell, but secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. Sarah had managed to keep her story buried for months, focusing entirely on becoming the best soldier she could be. The physical training helped her channel her emotions into something productive. The discipline of military life gave her structure that she desperately needed. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she had a purpose that extended beyond her own pain. The base operated like a small city, with hundreds of soldiers going about their daily routines. Sarah had learned to blend in perfectly, never drawing attention to herself. Never causing problems, never giving anyone a reason to look too closely at her background or her motivations for being there. She thought she could continue this way indefinitely, serving her country while keeping her personal demons safely locked away. What Sarah didn't know was that her carefully constructed anonymity was about to be shattered. Commander Robert Hayes had recently been transferred to Fort Braxton, bringing with him 30 years of military experience and an eye for details that others often missed. He had seen thousands of soldiers come and go, and he had developed an instinct for recognizing when someone was carrying more than just their assigned equipment. During his first weeks at the base, Commander Hayes made it his priority to observe the troops under his command. He wanted to understand their strengths, their weaknesses, and their potential. Sarah had caught his attention not because of anything dramatic, but because of her quiet intensity. There was something in the way she approached every task, every training exercise, every interaction with fellow soldiers that suggested she was running from something or toward something with equal determination. The commander had no way of knowing that Sarah's tattoo held the key to understanding her drive and her pain. He had no idea that the seemingly random lines on her shoulder blade told a story that would explain everything about why she pushed herself so hard, why she volunteered for extra duties, and why she sometimes stared off into the distance with a look of profound sadness during quiet moments. As Sarah went through her daily routines, checking and rechecking her uniform to ensure the tattoo remained hidden, she never suspected that her carefully guarded secret was about to be exposed. The base medical facility had scheduled routine physical examinations for all personnel, and Sarah's appointment was coming up in just a few days. She had been through military medical exams before and knew the drill, but this time would be different. This time, Commander Hayes had decided to personally review all medical files as part of his assessment of the troops under his command. The medical examination took place on a Tuesday morning in the base's sterile white facility. Sarah had prepared herself mentally, as she always did, to keep her emotions in check while the medical staff documented every detail of her physical condition. The routine exam included checking for scars, tattoos, and any other markings that might affect her service or require medical attention. Dr. Patricia Williams. The base physician was thorough but efficient. She had examined thousands of soldiers and treated body art as just another checkbox on her medical forms. When she asked Sarah to remove her shirt for the back examination, Sarah complied without hesitation, though her heart rate increased slightly as her tattoo became visible. The doctor noted the tattoo's location and size in her report, describing it simply as geometric design, left shoulder blade, approximately 3 inches in diameter. She took a standard photograph for the medical file, as was protocol for all visible tattoos. Sarah put her shirt back on, completed the rest of the examination, and left the medical facility believing her secret remained safe. What Sarah didn't realize was that all medical files were now being reviewed by Commander Hayes as part of his comprehensive assessment of base personnel. 3 days after her examination, the commander sat in his office going through stacks of medical reports, personnel files, and service records. He believed that understanding his soldiers completely was essential to effective leadership. When he reached Sarah's file, he initially scanned through it quickly, noting her excellent physical condition and clean medical history. But when he reached the photograph of her tattoo, he stopped cold. The geometric lines that had appeared meaningless to everyone else triggered a memory in the commander's mind. He stared at the image for several long minutes, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. Commander Hayes had seen those exact lines before, but not as a tattoo. 25 years earlier, during his deployment in Afghanistan, he had encountered a symbol that bore striking similarity to Sarah's design. It wasn't a perfect match, but the core pattern was unmistakable. The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. He had been a young lieutenant then, leading a small patrol through a village that had recently been attacked. Among the devastation, they had found a family's home completely destroyed, with symbols carved into what remained of the wooden doorframe. The local interpreter had explained that these symbols were a traditional way of honoring lost family members, particularly children who had died in tragic circumstances. The commander reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook he had carried for decades. Buried among pages of notes and observations from his various deployments was a rough sketch he had made of those symbols all those years ago. He held it up next to Sarah's medical photo, and his suspicions were confirmed. The patterns were too similar to be coincidental, but Commander Hayes was a careful man who had learned not to jump to conclusions during his long military career. He needed more information before approaching Sarah directly. He understood that if his suspicions were correct, this young soldier was carrying an enormous emotional burden that might explain her behavior and dedication to service. The commander spent the next 2 hours researching everything he could find about Sarah's background. Her personnel file contained basic information about her hometown, her family, and her reasons for enlisting. But something was missing. The standard interview notes seemed unusually brief, and there were gaps in her personal history that suggested someone had been selective about what information to include. He discovered that Sarah had listed her emergency contact as an aunt rather than parents or siblings, which was unusual but not unprecedented. Many soldiers came from complicated family situations. However, when he cross-referenced her hometown with news archives from around the time she would have gotten her tattoo, he found something that made his stomach drop. A local newspaper article from 3 years ago reported a house fire that had claimed the lives of an entire family. The victims included 2 parents and their 8-year-old daughter. The cause of the fire had been determined to be electrical, but the family had been trapped inside due to security bars on the windows that prevented escape. Only one family member had survived, Sarah Martinez, who had been staying at a friend's house that night. The commander sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the realization of what Sarah's tattoo likely represented. Those geometric lines weren't abstract art or tribal designs. They were a memorial, a permanent reminder of the family she had lost in that terrible fire. The pattern probably represented something specific about her little sister or her parents, something meaningful that only Sarah would understand. Commander Hayes found himself in a delicate situation. He now understood why Sarah pushed herself so hard, why she seemed to carry an invisible weight, and why she had chosen to serve her country. But he also knew that approaching her about this discovery would require extreme sensitivity. Military personnel dealt with trauma in different ways, and Sarah had clearly chosen to process her grief privately while channeling her pain into service. Commander Hayes spent several sleepless nights deciding how to handle his discovery about Sarah's tattoo. He had dealt with soldiers carrying traumatic pasts before, but this situation felt different. Sarah wasn't displaying obvious signs of distress or struggling with her duties. In fact, she was performing exceptionally well, which sometimes indicated that someone was using work as a way to avoid processing difficult emotions. The commander decided to observe Sarah more carefully over the following weeks. He watched how she interacted with other soldiers, how she approached training exercises, and how she handled stress. What he noticed confirmed his growing concern. Sarah was almost too perfect in her performance. Never complaining, never asking for help, never showing vulnerability of any kind. During a particularly challenging training exercise involving rescue scenarios, Commander Hayes noticed something that solidified his understanding of Sarah's situation. The exercise required soldiers to navigate through a burning building simulation to rescue trapped civilians. While most soldiers approached the task with standard military focus, Sarah's behavior was different. Her hands shook slightly before entering the simulated burning structure, and afterward she spent longer than usual in the debriefing area. Staring at the fake smoke dissipating in the air, the commander realized that Sarah was reliving her trauma every time she encountered scenarios involving fire or trapped people, but she was pushing through it with sheer determination. Her exceptional performance wasn't just dedication to duty. It was a form of self-punishment and an attempt to master the very situation that had taken her family away from her. 3 weeks after discovering the truth about her tattoo, Commander Hayes decided he needed to create an opportunity for Sarah to share her story voluntarily. He couldn't simply confront her with his discovery, as that would be a violation of her privacy and could damage the trust between them. Instead, he began incorporating her into special assignments that would require more one-on-one interaction. The opportunity came when the base received a request to provide community outreach to local schools about fire, safety, and emergency preparedness. Commander Hayes specifically assigned Sarah to help develop the presentation, knowing that this topic might create an opening for her to share her experiences if she felt ready. Sarah approached the assignment with her usual professionalism, but Commander Hayes noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She spent extra hours researching fire safety statistics, and her presentation materials were unusually detailed and passionate. During one of their planning meetings, she mentioned that she thought children should learn early about escape routes and emergency planning. As they worked together on the project, Commander Hayes found small ways to share stories from his own deployments, particularly incidents where he had witnessed the aftermath of tragic accidents. He spoke about how these experiences had shaped his understanding of the importance of military service and protecting others. His goal was to create a safe space where Sarah might feel comfortable opening up about her own motivations. The breakthrough came during a late evening when they were finalizing the fire safety presentation. Sarah had been working on a section about escape planning when she suddenly stopped typing and stared at the computer screen for several long minutes. Commander Hayes noticed her emotional shift but waited patiently, sensing that she was wrestling with something important. Finally, Sarah spoke quietly without looking away from the screen. She told him that she believed fire safety education was crucial because she had learned firsthand how quickly everything could change. She mentioned that she had lost people close to her in a house fire, and that experience had motivated her to join the military where she could dedicate her life to protecting others. Commander Hayes listened carefully, asking gentle questions that allowed Sarah to share as much or as little as she felt comfortable revealing. She told him about her family, about the night she wasn't home, and about the guilt she carried for surviving when they didn't. She didn't mention her tattoo specifically, but she talked about how she carried reminders of them, With her every day, the commander recognized this as a significant moment of trust. Sarah had never spoken about her loss with anyone on the base, and her willingness to share even basic details represented a major step in processing her grief. He thanked her for trusting him with her story and assured her that her service honored her family's memory in the most meaningful way possible. Over the following days, their working relationship evolved into something deeper than typical commander-soldier interactions. Commander Hayes began to understand that Sarah's exceptional performance was both a strength and a potential weakness. Her drive came from a place of love and loss, but her reluctance to seek support or acknowledge her own needs could eventually lead to burnout or emotional breakdown. 2 months after their initial conversation about her family's tragedy, Sarah had grown more comfortable working with Commander Hayes. She began to see him not just as her superior officer, but as someone who understood the weight that soldiers sometimes carried beyond their official duties. However, she still hadn't revealed the full significance of her tattoo or the specific details of how she memorialized her loss. Family members. The turning point came during an unexpected crisis on the base. A kitchen fire broke out in the mess hall during dinner preparation, sending thick smoke throughout the building and triggering evacuation alarms. While the fire department quickly contained the blaze, several soldiers were trapped briefly in a storage room when smoke blocked their planned exit route. Sarah was among the first responders to arrive at the scene. Commander Hayes watched as she immediately took charge of evacuation procedures, helping to guide soldiers to safety with calm efficiency. But when she emerged from the building after ensuring everyone was accounted for, he noticed that her hands were trembling and her breathing was labored in a way that went beyond normal physical exertion from the rescue effort. After the all-clear was given, and the immediate crisis had passed, Commander Hayes found Sarah sitting alone behind the medical facility, staring at the smoke still rising from the mess hall. Her professional composure had cracked, and for the first time since he had known her, she looked vulnerable and shaken. The commander approached slowly and asked if she was okay. Sarah's response surprised him with its honesty. She told him that even though she had trained for emergency situations countless times, being inside a burning building brought back memories that she thought she had learned to control. She said the smell of smoke and the sound of people calling for help transported her back to the night her family died. For several minutes, they sat in silence watching the last wisps of smoke disappear into the evening sky. Then Sarah began to speak about something she had never shared with anyone. She told Commander Hayes that on the night of the fire that killed her family, she had tried to go back into the house to save them, but neighbors had physically restrained her. The guilt of not fighting harder to reach them had haunted her for 3 years. As she talked, Sarah unconsciously reached back and touched her left shoulder blade where her tattoo was hidden beneath her uniform. The gesture was subtle, but Commander Hayes noticed it and realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for. Without directly mentioning that he had seen her medical file, he gently asked if she carried any physical reminders of her family with her. Sarah hesitated for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything between them. She told him about her tattoo, explaining that the geometric lines that looked meaningless to everyone else were actually a blueprint of her childhood home's floor plan. Each line represented a room where her family had lived and loved and created memories together. The pattern showed the layout of their house exactly as it had been before the fire destroyed everything. She explained that her 8-year-old sister Emma had drawn countless pictures of their house, always including every detail from the kitchen, where their mother cooked breakfast, to the living room where they watched movies together. After Emma died in the fire, Sarah found one of these drawings in her backpack at school. The tattoo was her way of carrying that drawing, and therefore Emma's memory. With her always, Commander Hayes was deeply moved by this revelation. He understood now that Sarah's tattoo wasn't just a memorial. It was a way of keeping her family's love alive in a tangible form. The geometric lines that had seemed abstract to medical staff were actually the most intimate and personal tribute she could have chosen. The commander shared his own realization that he had recognized elements of her tattoo design from symbols he had encountered during his deployment years earlier. He explained how those symbols had been used to honor lost family members, and how seeing Sarah's similar pattern had triggered his memory and his concern for her well-being. Sarah was initially surprised that he had made this connection, but she felt relieved rather than violated. For the first time in 3 years, someone else understood the true meaning of what she carried on her skin. Commander Hayes assured her that her secret was safe with him, but he also gently suggested that carrying this burden alone might not be necessary anymore. Their conversation that evening marked a fundamental shift in their relationship. Sarah began to understand that her commander's interest in her well-being went beyond her performance as a soldier. He cared about her as a person who had survived an unimaginable loss and found the strength to channel her grief into service to others. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself opening up more about her family, sharing stories about Emma's personality and her parents' dreams for the future. Commander Hayes listened to these stories with patience and respect, never trying to offer easy comfort or simple solutions, but simply acknowledging the magnitude of what she had lost and the courage it took to continue serving others despite her pain. As winter approached Fort Braxton, Sarah found herself in an unexpected position. Commander Hayes had been gradually involving her in more leadership responsibilities, recognizing that her personal experiences had given her unique insights into handling crisis situations and supporting fellow soldiers who might be struggling with their own challenges. The commander's approach was subtle but deliberate. He assigned Sarah to mentor new recruits, particularly those who seemed to be carrying heavy emotional baggage from their civilian lives. He noticed that she had a natural ability to recognize when someone was pushing themselves too hard or using military discipline as a way to avoid dealing with personal pain, probably because she had been doing the same thing herself. One of the recruits Sarah was assigned to mentor was Marcus Thompson, a 19-year-old from Detroit whose younger brother had been killed in a gang shooting 6 months earlier. Marcus threw himself into training with an intensity that reminded Commander Hayes of Sarah's own approach when she first arrived at the base. The young man rarely spoke about his past, but his determination to excel at every task suggested he was trying to prove something or escape something. Sarah recognized the signs immediately. During their training sessions, she noticed how Marcus's jaw clenched when other soldiers talked casually about their families, and how he stayed late in the gym every night, pushing his body to exhaustion. She understood that he was using physical pain to distract himself from emotional pain, just as she had done. The breakthrough with Marcus came during a particularly difficult obstacle course exercise. He had been struggling with a rope climbing section and was growing increasingly frustrated with his repeated failures. Other instructors might have pushed him harder or told him to quit for the day, but Sarah took a different approach. She sat down beside Marcus and told him that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who have already survived the worst thing they could imagine. She shared that she had learned the difference between running away from pain and running toward purpose, and that military service could be either one, depending on how you approached it. Marcus was initially resistant to opening up, but Sarah's quiet understanding eventually broke through his defenses. He told her about his brother, about the guilt he felt for not being there to protect him, and about his desperate need to become someone who could prevent other families from experiencing the same loss. Sarah listened to Marcus's story and saw her own journey reflected in his words. She realized that Commander Hayes had been right when he suggested that her experiences could help other soldiers. Her understanding of grief and survival wasn't just personal anymore. It had become a tool she could use to support others who were fighting similar battles. This realization prompted Sarah to make a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She asked Commander Hayes if she could start an unofficial support group for soldiers who had experienced traumatic losses before joining the military. She explained that the standard military counseling resources were helpful, but sometimes people needed to talk with others who had survived similar experiences. Commander Hayes was immediately supportive of the idea, but he wanted to ensure it was structured properly to provide real help without interfering with military discipline or official mental health services. Together, they developed a plan for monthly informal discussions where soldiers could share their stories voluntarily and support each other's healing process. The first meeting was held in a small conference room on a Sunday evening. Sarah had expected maybe 3 or 4 people to show up, but 8 soldiers came, including Marcus and several others she hadn't known were carrying hidden grief. Each person shared as much or as little as they felt comfortable revealing, and Sarah was amazed by the strength and resilience represented in that room. During the second meeting, something unexpected happened. Commander Hayes asked if he could attend as a participant rather than an observer. He shared his own story about losing several soldiers under his command during his early years as an officer, and how that loss had shaped his approach to leadership ever since. His willingness to be vulnerable with the group set a powerful example about how sharing pain could become a source of strength rather than weakness. As the support group grew and evolved, Sarah found that talking about her family's death and the meaning of her tattoo had begun to change her relationship with her grief. She was still dedicated to honoring their memory through her service, but she no longer felt like she had to carry that burden entirely alone. The geometric lines on her shoulder blade still represented her childhood home in Emma's drawing, but they had taken on an additional meaning. They now symbolized the foundation she was building for a community of soldiers who understood that survival wasn't just about physical strength or military training. Sometimes it was about finding the courage to share your story with people who could truly understand what you had endured. Marcus became one of the most active participants in the group, and his transformation from isolated and angry to open and supportive inspired other soldiers to take similar risks with vulnerability. Sarah began to see that her willingness to share the truth about her tattoo had created a ripple effect that was helping more people than she had ever imagined possible. A year had passed since Commander Hayes first noticed the true meaning of Sarah's tattoo, and Fort Braxton had become a different kind of place for many of its soldiers. The informal support group that Sarah had started had grown into an officially recognized program that was being studied by military mental health professionals as a model for other bases around the country. Sarah had been promoted to sergeant, and her leadership style reflected everything she had learned about turning personal pain into purpose. She still carried the geometric lines of her childhood home on her shoulder blade, but they no longer felt like a secret burden she had to hide from the world. Instead, they had become a source of strength that connected her to both her lost family and her chosen military family. The fire safety presentation that had initially brought Sarah and Commander Hayes together had evolved into a comprehensive emergency preparedness program that was now mandatory training for all base personnel. Sarah's personal understanding of how quickly tragedy could strike made her uniquely qualified to teach others about the importance of being prepared, while also helping them process their own fears and anxieties about emergency situations. Marcus Thompson had grown into one of Sarah's most trusted assistants in the support group program. His transformation from an angry, isolated recruit to a compassionate leader who helped other soldiers work through their grief had been remarkable to witness. He often told new group members that Sarah had taught him the difference between carrying grief as a weapon against yourself and carrying it as armor to protect others. The success of the support group had attracted attention from military officials beyond Fort Braxton. Sarah found herself invited to speak at conferences about innovative approaches to soldier mental health and resilience training. During these presentations, she sometimes shared the story of her tattoo, explaining how a symbol that had started as a private memorial had become a foundation for building community among people who understood loss. Commander Hayes had been selected for promotion and would soon be transferred to a new assignment. But before leaving Fort Braxton, he wanted to ensure that the programs Sarah had developed would continue to thrive. He had recommended her for additional leadership training and had written a commendation that specifically noted her ability to transform personal tragedy into institutional strength. On the commander's last day at the base, he and Sarah had a final conversation about the journey they had shared. He told her that in 30 years of military service, he had rarely seen someone demonstrate such courage in the face of personal loss. He explained that her willingness to trust him with her story had not only helped her heal, but had created a legacy of support that would benefit soldiers for years to come. Sarah thanked the commander for seeing past her carefully constructed professional facade to recognize the pain she was carrying. She told him that his gentle approach to helping her open up had taught her important lessons about leadership that went far beyond military strategy. Sometimes the most powerful thing a leader could do was create space for people to be human rather than just soldiers. As they talked, Sarah reflected on how much her understanding of her tattoo had evolved. The geometric lines still represented her family's home in Emma's drawing, but they now also symbolized the foundation she had built for a community of healing. The pattern that had once been visible only to medical staff and close friends had become a story she could share, to help others understand that survival was possible even after unimaginable loss. 6 months after Commander Hayes left Fort Braxton, Sarah received a letter from him describing how he had implemented similar support programs at his new base, using the model they had developed together. He told her that her influence was spreading throughout the military, helping soldiers at installations across the country find healthier ways to process trauma and build meaningful connections with their fellow service members. Sarah kept that letter in the same drawer where she stored Emma's original drawing of their childhood home. Both documents represented different chapters in her journey from devastating loss to purposeful service. The drawing reminded her of the love that had shaped her early life, while the letter showed her how that love had expanded to encompass hundreds of soldiers who were learning to transform their own pain into strength. The tattoo on her shoulder blade remained unchanged, but its meaning continued to grow. What had started as a private memorial to her family had become a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever felt like their pain was too heavy to carry alone. Sarah had learned that the most powerful way to honor the people we lose is to use their memory to help heal the people we can still save. When new recruits arrived at Fort Braxton and heard about the support group program, many were surprised to learn that it had started with one soldier's willingness to share the story behind a simple geometric tattoo. Sarah's legacy was proof that sometimes the smallest acts of courage, like trusting someone with your deepest pain, could create changes that rippled far beyond anything you could imagine. When you first took that frightening step toward vulnerability,